Veterans sacrifice everything for their nation, but who's truly watching out for them? What Trump did inside Walter Reed left even the doctors stunned. No one saw it coming. No reporters. No camera crews. No grand social media announcements. Just a line of black SUVs quietly pulling up to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Inside, the hospital buzzed with its usual urgency. Doctors and nurses moved swiftly, tending to soldiers, men and women who had given so much, sometimes quite literally, in service to their country. Most had no clue who had just stepped through the doors. Donald Trump entered, but not in the way people expected. No press conference, no flashing cameras, none of the usual spectacle. His energy seemed subdued, his movements deliberate. He wasn't here for politics. This was personal. Dr. Samuel Richards, the hospital director, met him with a firm handshake and guided him down the corridor. "They don't know you're coming," he murmured. "Might be better that way." Trump gave a silent nod, his focus straight ahead. Somewhere down the hall, the faint squeak of a wheelchair's wheels echoed against the polished floor. A soldier, missing both legs, carefully maneuvered into one of the common rooms. Another sat nearby, head down, eyes glued to his phone, the weight of his reality pressing heavy on his shoulders. Trump absorbed it all. This wasn't just another visit. This wasn't about appearances. This was something deeper. But the moment that would leave everyone speechless was still to come. The scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, and fresh linens. The steady hum of medical monitors mixed with the occasional hushed conversation. As Trump walked past open doors, he caught glimpses of men and women whose bodies bore the true cost of war. Missing limbs, burned scars, eyes filled with stories too heavy for words. Some patients recognized him. A few sat up straighter, while others hesitated, unsure whether to salute or shake his hand. One soldier, his left arm secured in a sling, lifted a thumbs up. Trump returned the gesture, a simple but real exchange. He paused at the door of Sergeant Daniel Reyes, a 29-year-old veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. His right leg had been amputated below the knee, yet his spirit remained unshaken. "Didn't expect to see you here, sir," Reyes said, adjusting himself in bed. Trump pulled up a chair. "Didn't expect to be here," he admitted. "But I heard about you guys. Figured I should see for myself." Reyes smirked. "They keeping you on a short leash, or do you actually get to walk around?" A chuckle. "They let me walk around, as long as I don't cause trouble." For a few minutes, they talked. No politics. No policies. Just life. Reyes joked about the hospital food, about how he planned to outrun every physical therapist who tried to push him into another round of rehab. For a moment, it all felt normal. As Trump stood to leave, he asked, "You need anything?" Reyes hesitated, then shook his head. "Just keep looking out for guys like us." With a firm pat on his shoulder, Trump stepped back into the hallway. But it wasn't until he reached the last room on the right that everything shifted. The hospital was no longer quiet. Word had spread. Some patients had wheeled themselves into the hall, others propped themselves up in bed, peering through their open doors. Whatever they thought of him, good, bad, indifferent, one thing was clear: Donald Trump was here. And he wasn't rushing through like some politician on a schedule. He stopped. He listened. In one room, he sat beside Private First Class Jordan Tate, a 22-year-old with a fresh bandage wrapped around his head. Shrapnel had taken part of his hearing, and his words came out slow, careful. "I had plans," Tate said, his voice quieter than the machines beeping behind him. "College. Maybe law school." He exhaled, staring down at his hands. "Now, I don't know. Trump leaned in slightly. You're young. You've got time to figure it out. Tate let out a hollow laugh. Yeah, but what if I can't? For a second, Trump didn't say anything. Then, in a rare moment of raw honesty, he admitted, I don't have that answer. A pause. Then his voice steadied. But I do know one thing. You don't quit. You don't let this decide the rest of your life. Tate nodded, his expression. Guess I don't have much of a choice, huh? Trump stood, extending a firm handshake. You do. And you made the right one. The next room felt different. Inside, Lieutenant Mark Holloway, a 41-year-old Army Ranger, sat upright, his wife and 2 kids at his side. A long scar stretched from his temple down to his jawline. In the corner, his uniform hung neatly, the name tag still pinned in place. His wife, Karen, offered a polite smile. Didn't expect visitors today. Trump's eyes flicked to the children, maybe 6 and 8 years old. They stared back, wide-eyed, unsure whether to feel excited or afraid. What happened to him? The youngest asked, pointing at their father's scar. Before anyone could answer, Holloway ruffled his son's hair. Something that was worth it. Trump watched the exchange, something shifting in his expression. He shook Holloway's hand firmly. Hell of a family you've got here. Karen nodded. They're why he fought. Trump turned to leave but hesitated, standing there a moment longer. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, Make sure they know what he did for them. Karen smiled, but the weight of those words lingered long after he left the room. But it was in the next room that Trump came face to face with something that stopped him in his tracks. This room felt smaller. Fewer machines. Fewer visitors. Just one man sitting in a hospital bed, staring blankly at the television, watching but not really seeing. The sound was off. Trump stepped inside. The Marine didn't react right away. He was young, maybe 24, 25. Short buzz cut. Strong jawline. The kind of guy who had probably run 5 miles before sunrise every day for years. Now, he wasn't moving at all. Mind if I sit? Trump asked. The Marine's eyes flicked toward him, then back to the screen. He shrugged. It's a free country. Trump pulled up a chair. What's your name? Corporal Jake Lawson. His voice was flat, practiced, like he'd answered that question 100 times in the past few weeks. Trump's gaze drifted to the wheelchair near the foot of the bed. How long have you been here? Lawson sighed, rubbing his temple. Since the blast. 3 months. A beat of silence. Doctors say you're stuck in that chair? Lawson nodded, his jaw tightening. Yeah. They say the spine's done. No more running. No more jumping. Just this. He motioned toward the wheelchair, his voice laced with a bitterness sharp enough to cut steel. And after rehab? Maybe a desk job. Maybe nothing. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Bet that makes a great headline, huh? Marine gives everything, gets nothing. Trump sat back, studying him. He wasn't here to argue. Wasn't here to tell him to stay positive or push through. This kid had lost something no speech could ever bring back. I won't pretend to know what that feels like, Trump finally said. But I'll tell you this. You're not forgotten. Lawson scoffed. That's what they all say. Trump didn't blink. Because it's true. Something in Lawson's face shifted. His hands curled into fists on his lap, his breath uneven. You know what I hate, he muttered. I hate that I'd do it again. That if I had to, I'd take the same damn risk. Trump said nothing. He let the words hang in the air. I didn't do it for politicians, Lawson continued. Didn't do it for medals or handshakes. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And now, he swallowed hard. Now I'm just another guy in a wheelchair. Another guy waiting to be forgotten. For the first time since stepping into the room, Trump leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice dropped, low and steady. You're not just another guy, he said. You're the reason this country still has men willing to fight. Lawson clenched his jaw, looking away. Trump exhaled, tapping his fingers against the armrest. Then, in a quiet but certain voice, he said, I want to do something for you. Lawson frowned. Like what? Trump stood, meeting his eyes dead on. Something no one else would do, and what he said next left the entire hospital in stunned silence. The room had fallen completely still. Even the steady hum of the medical monitors seemed to fade into the background. Trump stood there, both hands resting on the back of the chair he had just been sitting in. Corporal Jake Lawson stared at him, waiting, expecting the usual words, the empty promises, the well-worn "we'll take care of you" speech that never meant much outside these hospital walls. But that's not what happened. Trump exhaled slowly through his nose, his gaze sharp, filled with something Lawson couldn't quite read. I'm setting up a foundation in your name, he said. Not a charity. Not some PR stunt. A real damn foundation. For men like you. Guys who come back and end up stuck in a system that forgets them. Lawson's brow creased. What? You're not gonna rot in this hospital, Trump continued, his voice steady. You're not gonna spend the next 10 years wondering if anybody remembers what you gave. I'm making sure you, and every other veteran in your position, get the rehab, the support, the future you deserve. Lawson blinked. His hands, which had been clenched into fists, loosened just slightly. You're serious? Trump didn't flinch. Dead serious. The door had been slightly open, and now, just outside, a handful of nurses stood frozen in place. A doctor leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Even the Marine in the next bed, who had been pretending not to listen, turned his head slightly. Sir, Lawson started, then stopped. He didn't know what to say. For the first time since waking up in this hospital, he felt something unfamiliar, a crack in the numbness. Hope. Trump reached out, clasping Lawson's hand with a firm grip. This isn't for the cameras. This isn't for politics. This is because I can. And because you damn well earned it. Lawson swallowed hard, his throat tight. From the hallway, someone whispered, Did he just say what I think he said? And in that instant, something shifted, not just in the room, but in every person who heard it. No one moved. The air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. Even the usual background noise of the hospital, the soft murmur of conversations, the distant shuffle of footsteps, seemed to disappear. Then, one of the nurses outside the door exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath. Another exchanged wide-eyed glances with a colleague. The doctor, who had been leaning against the wall, suddenly straightened. But all eyes were on Corporal Jake Lawson. He wasn't the type to cry easily. The Marines had hardened him, taught him how to bury emotions deep. And yet, here he was, sitting in that hospital bed, blinking rapidly, his throat working to push down whatever was rising inside him. His fingers tightened around Trump's hand, gripping it with a strength that defied his injuries. He stopped, shook his head, then tried again. I don't know what to say. Trump gave a small nod. Then don't say anything. Just get better. The doctor finally spoke, his voice careful, controlled. Mr. Trump, This is not what I expected today. There was something in his expression, something close to admiration. Trump turned to him. What do you need to make this happen? The doctor hesitated, glancing at Lawson before answering. Rehab. Specialized therapy. Long-term care that the VA doesn't always cover. We do what we can, but it's never enough. Trump's response was immediate. Then I'll cover what they don't. The words settled over the room like a heavy weight. A younger Marine in the next bed, his face still lined with healing burns, let out a low whistle. Damn, he muttered. Guess I should have asked for a Ferrari. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, but the weight of what had just happened remained. Outside the room, a small crowd had gathered. Nurses, doctors, hospital staff. Some whispered to each other, others just stood there, stunned. One of them, a nurse in her 50s, pressed a hand to her chest. I've worked here for 20 years, she murmured. I've never seen anything like this. A few feet away, a soldier in a wheelchair discreetly wiped at his face, turning away. Trump straightened. Make sure he gets what he needs, he said to the doctor. And not just him. Every soldier like him. The doctor nodded slowly. We'll do our part. But Mr. Trump, are you sure about this? Trump's gaze shifted back to Lawson. The young Marine sat there, still gripping the sheets, like he was afraid to let go of this moment. I don't make promises I don't keep. And with that, without another word, he turned and walked out. Trump didn't look back as he made his way down the hall, but the weight of the moment stayed with him. He carried it the way a man used to expectations would, aware of the eyes on him, the unspoken thoughts that followed. But this wasn't some campaign rally. There were no flashing cameras, no press waiting to twist the story. Just the quiet shuffle of hospital staff, the low murmurs of recovering soldiers, and the lingering scent of antiseptic in the air. The doctors and nurses who had witnessed the exchange didn't stop him. But their faces, their expressions spoke louder than words. Some looked stunned. Others just stared, as if still processing what had just taken place. As he stepped into the hospital's main corridor, Trump passed a Vietnam veteran sitting by the window in a wheelchair. Deep lines marked the old soldier's face, his thin hair still holding streaks of its original dark brown. His hands, worn, calloused, rested on his knees. Mr. President, the man rasped, stopping Trump in his tracks. Trump turned. The veteran studied him for a long moment before giving a slow, knowing nod. Not in admiration, not in blind loyalty, but in understanding. They won't forget this. Trump held his gaze for a second, then gave a simple reply. Good. That was it. No speech. No grand farewell. He pushed open the door and stepped into the cold afternoon air, his security detail falling into formation behind him. Near the entrance, a hospital worker muttered under his breath, "Did that really just happen?" But inside, back in that hospital room, Corporal Jake Lawson still sat there, staring at the ceiling, gripping the sheets like he was holding on to something that, for the first time in a long time, felt real. The news never covered it. No headlines. No viral clips. No commentators picking apart every word. But inside Walter Reed, something had shifted. Doctors whispered about it between shifts. The nurses who had seen it firsthand carried that moment with them. And the soldiers, the ones who had spent weeks, months, even years feeling like forgotten relics, felt something they hadn't in a long, long time. Hope. For Corporal Jake Lawson, life didn't suddenly get easier. He still faced long months of rehab ahead, still had moments where he'd stare at his motionless legs, feeling that familiar frustration creeping back in. But this time, he wasn't alone. The foundation Trump had promised, It wasn't just talk. It was real. Within weeks, it started taking shape. Specialized rehab programs were funded, career training was offered, and men like Lawson were given more than just a folded flag and a list of benefits that barely covered the basics. And it didn't stop there. Veterans who had overheard that conversation, they started talking. More stories surfaced, stories of men and women who had given everything and received little in return. The ripple effect spread beyond Walter Reed, beyond Washington, beyond politics itself, because at its core, this wasn't about policies or party lines. It was about something far simpler, a promise kept. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Words, they're easy. Speeches, they're rehearsed. But when a man looks another in the eye and says, "You're not forgotten," and then proves it, that's what really matters. Maybe we don't need more grand gestures. Maybe we don't need more empty promises. Maybe what we need is more action. More moments that remind us that behind every uniform is a person, someone who sacrificed more than most of us will ever understand. And maybe, just maybe, it's on us to make sure they never have to wonder if it was worth it. If you believe the sacrifices of these men and women should never be forgotten, take a moment, share this story. Keep their names alive. Because at the end of the day, a nation is only as strong as the way it treats those who fought for it.